mess with this, huh?
Is something wrong?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Really?
Yeah, I'm getting all these. Must be in the download. It's okay.
What happened?
I was just getting a bunch of boxes, like this document wasn't opened anymore. Yeah, it's okay.
Got it.
Technical issues here as we get set up for tonight. Okay, we're back on chapter 9 of the Avatamsaka Sutra, and last week we finished up a verse, and the verse was, if we're finding ourselves in the text here, see if I can call it up. It says it's still downloading. That's okay, I just put it into a pause mode.
What's it down?
Here, take a look.
Oh, you can close that window.
Close?
Yeah, it's already done.
Okay.
That's not needed anymore. Yeah.
Okay, we're on the last two verses of the first section of verses in chapter 9, Luminous Awakening. In my text, it's 12 and 13. I'm guessing it's the same for the PDF online, or no?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. And again, this is a very rough English translation. Those of you who know the Chinese can see that actually the Chinese of the Avatamsaka is pretty straightforward in terms of not hard to read. That doesn't mean it's easy to translate. So even though one can understand the characters, understanding what the characters mean is another question. And even if we think we understand what it means, there's the additional problem of what it's pointing to. There's this wonderful passage in the Avatamsaka Sutra that talks about the importance of getting the spirit of the text and not simply the letter. So even though we have the Chinese letter, we have to go another level to get the English equivalent. And even when we get the English equivalent, that doesn't mean we have the spirit. And the Avatamsaka says it's like taking rice and giving it to children who are accustomed to having it cooked and steamed and giving it to them raw and asking them to digest it. That's one metaphor of having the letter but not the spirit. And then, of course, the other one in there is the famous one of the mistaking the finger that's used to indicate or point to the moon and then staring at the finger and thinking it is the moon instead of noticing what it's pointing to. So the letter is like a finger pointing to the moon, and the moon is the meaning of it, both within and beyond the letter. So we have here Zhong Sheng Wu You Sheng, Yi Fu Wu You Huai, Rao De Ru Zhi Shi Zhi, Dang Cheng Wu Shang Dao. Literally, then the translation, Zhongsheng is literally living, multitude, born, many, born, we'll go through this, without having birth. Also, basically without huai, going bad, decaying. So sometimes you see sheng and mia, meaning birth and death. Here it's huai. So then we would try, sort of like sheng wouldn't be so much, if we're going to contrast in English, sort of thriving, coming into being, and decaying and going bad. But living beings, it says, are not either born in that way, nor are they well, they use extinction here, but it actually means to decay, go bad, fall apart. Then it says, if attaining this kind of wisdom like this, then one will accomplish the unsurpassed way. We'll get to maybe the next verse in a minute. So this is the literal part, and let's look at this thing of living, translated as living beings, zhongsheng. It could be many kinds of beings. Zhong is just multitude, born. So it could be the ways in which beings are born, or it could be the categories of beings that exist in the sense that this is, okay, so this is tricky here. It says that they don't really come into being and go bad. So if we use the word exist, we have to use it in a very sort of Heraclitus type of way, that it's a ongoing, evolving, devolving, changing flux of something rather than a distinct kind of entity. You remember I mentioned Heraclitus earlier. He's a fellow that usually comes on Friday night. He's not here tonight, so we'll have to represent him a little bit. Actually, he's a Greek philosopher, long Why. He had his shung and he's had his why, and he's gone. And we too are having our shung, and soon we'll have our why, depending on how you look at it. But Heraclitus was the one who said you can't step into the same river twice. In other words, because the river is flowing, even though we call it a river, and it seems to be then this entity that's there and whatnot, it is actually nothing more than molecules rolling and flowing along. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less, sometimes it all dries up and evaporates. And in this sense, Heraclitus was pointing to another phenomena, that we are like these rivers. We think we're solid and permanent and real, but we're just molecules tossing and flowing. And so Heraclitus didn't say this, but I think it's in his meaning that not only can you not step into the same river twice, you being a river are not the same person stepping into the river. So it's not even the same person can step into the river twice. Not only the same river, but the same person. Because in an instance, as we know from just microbiology, if you really look at it, what a human body is tentatively held together, especially with the skin and the outer covering of just like a pot of stew. I mean, it's just everything's turning and churning and moving in there. So living beings here, the zhongsheng, is a particular way that these texts, particularly the Buddhist text, look at existence or existing. The Shurangama Sutra lists 12 kinds. So if you're interested in that, you can look at the Shurangama, and it goes into the 12 kinds of beings and how they come into being, which is more interesting than exactly what or who they are, and also how they go out of what we call existence. Generally, though, there's a kind of standard list that talks about 4 kinds of zhongsheng, 4 kinds of beings, and that they're described basically in terms of their sheng, their coming into being. So I want to be careful here, because what this text is getting at, this passage is getting at, is describing a dynamic, fluid process of transformation or transforming that's continually going on. So to reify it as beings is to miss the meaning of this. And so it's standing back, in a sense, it's looking at it both in an enlightened, awakened things as they are, but it's also quite scientific, because you can do the same thing with a microscope and whatnot, and you can go in to the human being or what we see to be a living being, and you can see that it's just a composite of flowing elements that are moving and churning and whatnot. And so it is really a process rather than a thing. So this becomes important. So these lists, the four, says born from womb, womb-born, born from moisture or water, born from egg, and born by transformation. So that what they're describing is that these temporary conditioned entities are interesting in how they're born rather than who or what they are, because they who and what they are is not a fixed thing at all. This is the fundamental, very important concept of emptiness in Buddhism, that everything is empty of a self-essential, a self-nature. It is a conditioned, and so everything is conditioned, co-conditioned in its existence. You can't find something that in and of itself exists without supporting causes and conditions that keep it. And as those supporting causes and conditions change, that thing or entity changes and therefore has no nature of its own. And this is part of the meaning of emptiness. So just to look at this a little more carefully, the womb-born is probably the one we're most familiar with, being womb-born ourselves. I'm saying, assuming that everybody who is watching here is, a womb-born mammal of some sort. That isn't necessarily the case, and I apologize to others who might be here and say I take umbrage with that. I wasn't born from a womb, but I can't confirm any of that. I just know that in the past it's said to be when the Buddhist texts are opened, even if one is a mediocre, even lousy lecturer, as myself, the text itself draws living beings from the 10 directions, including these beings we're talking about, and sometimes it's called the Eightfold Division, Tianlun Babu, who come to listen to the sutras. When we read the biographies and autobiographies of various cultivators in cross traditions, many of them report encountering these beings in the process of their cultivation, their solitary meditation, and actually speaking Dharma for them, including Maharagas and Devas and ghosts and spirits and so forth. But womb-born is really the case of mammals. Eggs, of course, we know the different kinds of creatures that are born from eggs. Some are born from dampness. I guess this is referring to something that has more to do with sort of like, I guess, worms, or that rely completely on dampness for a kind of birth field. And then birth by transformation. You know what birth by transformation is?
Butterflies?
Well, a butterfly could be, sort of I guess you could say it's a transformative birth. I'm not sure if a butterfly is a transformed birth, or whether it's a kind of egg that a butterfly comes out of. The cocoon is
different stages.
Yeah, but generally it's talked about. It's a kind of birth that isn't from womb or egg or dampness, and generally referring to like deities and ghosts and spirits. So they're not born from any. They're probably ghosts, spirits, maybe the hells, and perhaps deities. So sometimes when we talk about these births, we're talking about the 6 paths: hells, animals, ghosts, hungry ghosts sometimes they're called, people, asuras, and devas. And when you get to the asuras and devas, they're usually what's called transformation born. In a sense, and in a general sense, we're all transformation born. And by that I mean we come about transformed on the basis of our karma. But in this particular sense it's talking about here, these beings are not born with the help of parents or any other agency except karma. And so this is usually generally talking about multitude born, is talking about the 6 paths and how we migrate, as a language they use, or we move along transmigrate sometimes is used through these 6 paths and these 4 forms of birth. And this is describing the multitude. So I think the takeaway here, especially in terms of this verse, what we're looking at is basically what you have is a description of existing beings as a shifting impermanent flux of insubstantial, continuous interchanging elements. Sometimes we refer to these as the 5 skandhas. So it's basically the material element plus consciousness and mind. And behind this is that all of these phenomena lack a essential self-nature. In other words, they don't have a self-existing, I bet that's a better way of saying it, a self-existing presence or essence. They have no core, sort of ontologically speaking. They only appear to exist separately and independently by the power not only of conventional language, which we call them that, but actually conventional thought. And by conventional thought, I mean unawakened thought. So this is the big difference. Conventional thought, because it's based on a sense of self and a longing for a sense of self, actually imagines or constructs, the language uses, this idea of a permanent me or mine entity. And we project this on to all existing things, when in fact, if you step back and look at it, it's just like Heraclitus' river. There's just this flow. And sometimes things come together, sometimes they stay for a while, sometimes they're breaking up, and sometimes they just seem to disappear. And so they are dependently originated, not independently self-existing. There's a famous example where this is talked about, and I talked about it in one class, but I never got into it. It's a famous chariot analogy from another Buddhist text. And let's see if I can find it here. I'll share it with you. I was going to do it earlier, and I never got to it. So let's see if I can find it. This is great because I don't have to, my brain, as it starts to go, I can use this search mechanism here. So this is actually called the chariot simile, and it's the record of this exchange between King Milinda. Probably people think was actually the Greek king Menander in a place called Bactria, which is, if anybody's, probably nobody knows Bactria, you know Bactrian camels? Yes? Never heard of Bactria? Okay. They're all over Berkeley. They're really hard to find parking spaces here with the Bactrian camels, but never mind. It's present-day Afghanistan. So this was an area, Afghanistan, very interesting, in a crossroads between East and West at the time. Not as much now, but it was. And you remember Afghanistan, you think, but remember those humongous Buddha statues that were in Afghanistan that were then destroyed by the Taliban when they took over, dynamited them. Basically an international historical shrine site. But it showed you that very early on, as Buddhism moved out of India, before even it got to China, it went through the Central Asian areas, and Afghanistan was one of those. That's where also Alexander the Great went through. So you have these crossroads. That's why Kandahar, which is a city in Afghanistan, is actually in Greek Gandhar. So Gandharva statues are the ones that, when we look at, we say, now that's a Buddha I can identify with because it has this Greek, Romo-Greek visage. And that's because of the influence, the artistic influence of Greece in that area, and you get the Gandhara, a tradition of statuary.
I heard that someone says that the face of the Buddha from Gandhara period is actually it looks like Apollo.
Looks like Apollo.
Apollo.
Yeah.
Is very similar.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, there's a really subtitled interesting thing. the representation of a Buddha or the Buddha varies from culture to culture. Obviously, we have no pictures, but each culture has created a pictorial representation of the Buddha. And as you say, the Gandhara ones sort of look like the classic Apollo.
I'm not sure quite 100%, but it's...
Yeah. But if you look at Greek statuary, you'll see in the Gandhara images something that's very Greco-Roman in that way. And, but then if you look at Thailand or Burma or China or Japan, you'll find very, very different physiognomy in the Buddhas. The ears are different, the face is different. So we actually, but that's okay, because what it indicates is a universal capacity for anyone to become a Buddha, so it's not culturally bound. On the other hand, most of the statues of Buddhas don't look like anybody real. So again, you have to take it that they're actually symbolic representations rather than literal. Any event, I'm digressing. So this was probably one of those really interesting exchanges between an East and West mind, if you want to use it, between King Melinda, or Menander, who's Greek, and then Nagasena, who was a young monk. And so it's kind of what the exchange happened was Menander was philosophically inclined, which kings were from time to time. Currently, most of our leaders are not the least bit philosophically inclined and not even scientifically inclined. I don't know what they're inclined towards, but oops, I'm editorializing. Okay, I'll stop. And anyways, King Melinda or Menander was philosophically inclined, and he raised dilemmas about Buddhist philosophy. On one hand, he was really interested in it, but he had these really deep questions, and one of those questions was about the individual or the self and the teaching of not self. So the exchange was basically Nagasena comes and greets the king because the king requested that he come, and he said, "Are you Nagasena?" And Nagasena's answer was basically, "Yeah and no. I'm called Nagasena, but actually there's no permanent individual Nagasena that could be found." And the king was kind of amused by this, and he said, "Well, who is it that wears robes and takes the food I'm giving you? If there's no Nagasena, and who earns merit and gets demerit, and who causes karma? If what you say, a man could kill you and there would be no murder, Nagasena would be nothing but a sound." This is Menander going. So this is a kind of interesting exchange. You don't usually hear exchanges like that today reported. I mean, if you're sort of on BART and you're duty people, they don't carry on at this level, but at that time. Nagasena then asked the king how he had come to visit him at his hermitage, on a foot or by horseback, and the king said, "I came by chariot." And so Nagasena, without answering these questions, merit, demerit, karma, who creates, and so forth, he said, "But what is a chariot, king? Is it its wheels, or its axles, or the reins, or the frame, or the seat, or the pole, and whatnot? Or a combination of all those elements, or is it found outside those elements?" And the king answered no to each question. "Well, it wasn't that, it wasn't that, it wasn't that." And so then Nagasena said, "So there's no chariot, just like there's no Nagasena." And the king at this point acknowledged, and he kind of had an awakening. What he saw was that what we conceptually call Nagasena, or a person, is a mere name given to constituent parts that are present like a chariot, but none of these have a self-existing being to them. In other words, the five skandhas is what he's referring to. When the five skandhas, like the parts of a chariot, come together, we call it a being. Yet in each one of these parts, and even together, there's no self-existing permanent entity that we could call. Anyhow, this is that famous exchange between King Menander and Nagasena. You were going to ask something? Were you curious? Yeah. Okay, so this goes back then to, I think, the key point with this passage. if that's the case, then the passage we're looking at where it says beings are not created or destroyed or come into being or go bad, it doesn't mean that beings do not exist, but they exist in this impermanent, transforming, constantly changing way, so that there's nothing you can reify into a fixed, what they call philosophically substantialist position, or concepts of self. So this is where this is going, and this is part of we can say we understand this. Let me put it this way. We can say we understand this, and we know this. We actually know this. If you think about the beings that you have known just in your lifetime, some are gone. Some are still here. Some are coming into being. Someone may be pregnant or expecting. And some are kind of in a sense, they're existing now. But even as they're existing now, if you look carefully, you'll see it's an existing on a continuum of change. And no one day, no one month, no one year, and the Buddha would break it down into microseconds, not even thoughts. Is it the same being? As our thoughts change from thought to thought, we actually change who and what we are. As we take in food, depending on what it is, we transform ourselves, and it's not the same before lunch as it is after lunch. With the metabolism slowing and breaking down, I had that experience this week. We're online, right? We're doing this stuff online. And of course, when I go online, then I can click on the audio and the video. And I usually just click on the audio because I just want to hear things. But now with classes and everything, I have to click on the video. Well, clicking on the video, this is actually true. I clicked on the video and I saw my students in the class and I'm like, who's that? And that was me. I was looking at me. I was part of, I was like, whoa, who's that dude? You know, and what was happening was how I feel about myself and what I think about myself, I haven't changed in 30 years or 40 years. You know, and then when I saw myself, I thought, who's that old guy there? Yeah, he really looks old, you know, and he doesn't look like my young students. I thought, wow, I don't feel different than them. But when I looked at it, it's like, what's out of place in this picture? And it was me. And that was something of a shock. So what I'm trying to get at is that psychologically, we imagine we are eternal, fixed, and unchanging. But in reality, even to our own eyes, if we care to look. But what happens is if you don't look for a while and then you take a look, it's kind of shocking how much you've changed your age. You want to play fun? Go look at your earlier passports if you kept them, your earlier driver's license. Go back to when you first got I got my collection of driver's license, and I go through it, and it is a visual living image of impermanence. It's like, oh my gosh, wow, what happened there? So again, where this is going is that this is very easy on one level to understand. We can understand it cognitively, intellectually. We can all write really great papers about this. We could write poems about this. But at the psychological, emotional level, there's a huge wall of resistance to accepting this truth. We resist it. Even though, and we resist it on an emotional, psychological level, but even though modern science, or science for a long time, would come to the same conclusion, there's no self-existing permanent core of being there on the material level, or as far as what we can tell, even on what we call consciousness. So it would actually correspond very much to the view of Nagasena, to the view of these texts, and to what we understand of modern biology, chemistry, psychology, and so forth, and physics. Not only is that the case, but everything we look at in the universe, nothing in what we observe is not changing, subject to change, permanent. And yet, even though that's the case, and even though it's hitting us right between the eyebrows, psychologically, we set up an opposite view of a self and what belongs to a self. And the Buddha in some ways said, this is the root of suffering. This is the root of dissatisfaction, because you cannot hold that against the overarching reality out there. And that struggle to hold up the psychological imagined me and mine against the overwhelming reality of change and flux doesn't work. You can't do it. And it only increases more angst, more dissatisfaction. So, in a sense, what the text is dealing with is, if you look at these texts, it's really dealing with, why do we do that? What is that about? And what would happen if we didn't do that? If we let go of that, what would be? So, I mean, I don't want to delve too much into that tonight, but this is where the text is going. So what the verse says is, if you can get past that, you get what's called wisdom. This is the text that say you will obtain, you will gain a kind of wisdom, and you will accomplish an unsurpassed way. So that means that past this projection, imagined clinging and craving and grasping, when one lets go, it's not you let go into total emptiness or void, but you realize an unsurpassed way. So what is that? What is that? And how does one reach that? And it's kind of a paradox that you can't reach it except by letting go of this first, or in the process of letting go, that manifest. It's not like you can hold on to this and say, okay, show it to me, I want it. Because it actually, the realization of the unsurpassed way and that wisdom comes in the moment, in the existential exercise of the letting go. I don't know, it's so, I'm trying to think. If there's anything you compare, it's almost like, what is the sound of my glasses dropping on my computer? I really want to know that. Well, the only way I can know that is to let go of the glasses. But I want you to tell me in advance what that sound is, and tell me that there is a sound. You say there's an unsurpassed way, and it sounds like the glasses dropping on a computer. But I both want to have my glasses and know that sound. And until I let go, I don't know the sound. And what these texts are saying in a paradoxical way, unless you actually change your paradigm, shift your paradigm from hanging on to this, you will not be able, not only to imagine that, you will not be able to experience that. Because it only comes in the actual psychophysical, deep intellectual, emotional letting go that this opens up. So literally you can't get there from here, but you have to move beyond here to get there. And I don't know if this is kind of playing with language here, but you get the meaning? So this is why the text becomes so difficult, not to sort of gather in a intellectual way, but to actually take this on in the liberating psychological way. And really, it is at that level that most of us live. We really don't live in our heads. We talk about this and we imagine and project, but most of us arrive at what we're feeling and believing and doing on the basis of emotions and feelings and intuitions. Our rational thought processes are highly overrated. I mean, Freud understood this really well, and I think in this way he was right on. Most people are not living their lives according to reason. They rationalize their lives and their choices and their emotions by reason. But the affinities we have, the identities we have, the loves and hates we have, the careers we choose, our day-to-day longings and fears and ambitions are all in the realm of emotion. Very few of them are done on a strict, rational, Kantian cost-benefit, analysis. And yet we still think, we like to think that that's not the case. We see other people are that way, but we feel we're different. If it were not true, there would be not so much money to be made in advertising. Advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry because it knows most people are not governed by reason. They're governed by emotions, and finding those emotions can get movement and market share. So partly what we're doing with these texts when we investigate is to understand how we operate and then begin to see if we can't move to be more in accord with things as they really are, and see not self not as an absence of something, but actually the opening of what here is called, what's the text say? Unsurpassed way. Sometimes it's called wondrous existence. So I'll pause there because Jin Hui is going to talk tonight.
Hey, Marty?
Yes.
So, question on line spout. The Pure Land mentioned birth by transformation. Is that the same?
Yeah.
I would say it's probably, yes, the same. It's a transformational birth. It doesn't involve parents or any other agency besides karma and your merit and virtue, right? So if you just look at it from that frame, then it would be a transformation birth. But understand that transformation birth is also transforming birth. In other words, it's not then you've arrived. It just means the mechanism by which you come into being is through a transformation and not through the agency of parents or something like that. But also it doesn't mean it's permanent and forever. Good question.
Okay, so can I start? So welcome everyone. I was reflecting what Marty was saying about the impermanence of all things, about fact that everything is in constant flux and change. And one of the teaching what Stock is speaking about this is emptiness teaching. What you say, Marty also pointed out, the emptiness concept of emptiness. And one of the most well-known teaching which speaking about this is Heart Sutra. And at the beginning we can read when Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was practicing profound prajna paramita, she illuminated the 5 skandhas, and she saw that all are empty, and she crossed beyond all suffering and difficulties. And this is kind of the core of the prajna paramita of emptiness teaching, seeing through emptiness, impermanence, everything, the 5 skandhas, our body-mind concept. But I can confess to you, this is not my state. That the prajna paramita is very high level, and this part of the text is speaking about this. But what's really bring me think is that the concept of we see the process of Bodhisattva Guanyin, but she was illuminating, she using the light to see things clearly. And actually so we know this chapter is the luminous enlightenment, right? This is a lot of this text speaking about the light. At the beginning of the sutra, you can see this, all the festivals of lights are going on. The light is very important, the kind of core element of this part of the text and Avatamsaka text in general. But when I thinking about the light, what the light meaning or what means to illuminate, and I see one is the kind of characteristics that the light is. When we see something in new way, we are see kind of new possibilities, kind of new horizon open up, and we are kind of uplifted. We are inspired by something, right? So it's kind of we seeing something in new way, in new light. So this is the one aspect of the teaching, definitely, and the sutra, what's speaking about this. And another concept is that the light, what has a kind of different flavor, the light which penetrating the corners what we don't want to look at, the corners what are a little bit maybe scary, when we can see from the slides all our shortcuts, our afflictions, and different living beings which we don't want to look at. And so this, like Marty before mentioned, this teaching has the two components, is inspiring and subduing and taming. So this another way of seeing things through the light of kind of truth. And sometimes truth is difficult to accept. Even the fact that we are changing entities could be very scary for us. And also that this text can has this also this quality. Like for instance, I want to get back when I encountered Buddhism, I met Sixth Patriarch Sutra, and this sutra kind of generate light with I was able to see clearly my kind of real face, who I really are. It was very, very scary and very, very uncomfortable to seeing this, because first time in my life I was seeing myself with new lens, and also, so it was this kind of produced in me feeling of be uncomfortable and be in the a very challenging place, but also kind of showing me a new light that, oh, I have so many possibilities to be a new person. Is I can discover this my inner light when I let go all these living beings which cover my nature. So the teaching become as a kind of a lightening house that I have a direction that I can go to. And maybe concluding my reflection, I see this seeing things in new light illumines our capacity to seeing. We can encounter in the texts, we can encounter in the real people, the living people. I heard that Rinpo Master Hua has this ability to, I remember one time Marty shared that it was a feeling like look at on the operating sun, that everything was very, this light can see through us. Everything was uncovered and it was very uncomfortable to see. And this light, or the new way of things of new ways of see and understand, we can encounter from the difficulties sometimes we will uncover. And I think that right now we are in the pandemic period, and it's we are in the shelter in place, so we also have opportunity to look at more deeply, stop and illuminate what's really important, what's really valuable in our life, and this can helps us to understand where is our direction, where we want to live, and this light, we can discover new light, the new possibilities in our life, and so on. So maybe I stop here my reflection.
Maybe I just pause and end with a kind of riddle or puzzle that I think is embedded in these teachings. There can be a danger when we hear this, that everything is in flux, impermanent, there's no self-existing soul or person or this. It's very easy to fall into a kind of almost despairing nihilism and say, therefore, there is no rhyme or reason and nothing succeeds us past this current existence and so forth. Or to resist it and try to go about finding something, thinking we're finding something that's eternal, unchanging, and permanent. And both of these, according to these teachings, are a mistake in terms of our cognitive and psychological processes. But it's tempting. It's tempting either to just throw it all in and abandon hope, or to go an opposite way and deny the impermanence, and then in an imaginative way, whether it's in this life or in a future life, we project onto that there's a permanent, eternal, unchanging me and mine that will always be there. And the Buddha was stuck in his teaching between not falling into this eternalism, substantialism, nor falling into a kind of empty nihilism. And so, on one hand, many of his contemplations were to get us to break through the attachment and the illusion of the self and the self existing in both in ourselves and the larger world. At the same time, to have some faith, you could use, or confidence or trust that in the process of doing it correctly, not doing it incorrectly, but doing it correctly, there was something that was ineffable, wonderful, indescribable, called Buddha, called awakened existence, called nirvana, whatever terms that were used, and that it wasn't just a deconstructing down to zero and therefore nothing whatsoever. So that's why the statement the Buddha has upon his awakening, when he finally does the ultimate letting go, and you could see as he goes through his final teachers, each one of them had a little bit of something they still had onto in the highest states of meditation or realms. And he said, as long as there was that to hang on to and the wish to get that, I am not liberated, because it's still a grasping and a clinging. It's still a wanting, and that is at the heart of the dukkha. And so upon his awakening, he said all living beings have a enlightened, called Buddha nature, a Buddha potential, and all can become, realize this, is what the text is saying, the unsurpassed way. That then is the prospect that at the end of this inquiry, when all of the taking apart is done, there is this, whatever that is. If living beings were fixed, they existed and then they were gone, and not a bundle of potential, then there could not be that statement, all living beings have the Buddha nature, all could become Buddhas, because they would be living beings and Buddhas would be Buddhas. There'd be two different things. But it's really interesting, at the content we're saying, these impermanent influx, changing living beings, actually, right within that, there is something that can be realized called Buddha. So a living being is sort of a not yet realized Buddha. So the thing about the impermanence and flux is like, oh, everything's impermanent, nothing lasts forever, not even me, oh, wah, wah, wah. But you should also be very happy, because it means you can change. It's the positive side of this is that you are not stuck. And so that positive side of impermanence, that sometimes these concepts get rendered negatively, but in fact, impermanence is a profoundly liberating concept and reality, because it means a living being is not yet realized Buddha, therefore can become something different. And a Buddha is a realized living being. That's why my teacher always say, when you perfect your humanity, at the moment of perfecting your humanity, Buddhahood accomplishes itself. So it's along a line of continuum. So a living being is basically just a grasping knot. And when that knot is let go of, that's Buddha. So when the knot is let go, it's not nothing, it's Buddha. On the other hand, as much as, and I'm saying this from my own experience, as much as you think me, this living being, despite what I see in my face changing online and whatnot, I still imagine myself to be real and permanent, and I exist in this world, and all these things, my camera and guitar and all these things I own are also real. At the moment you breathe your last breath, it's gone. I'm just telling you, it be gone. It's gone. It's not like it fades away. It's just gone. None of that is there. And at that moment, there can be a kind of awakening like, holy crap, did I buy into this? Because I just got cheated royally. None of this exists. So part of where you start with your early cultivation is not to lose hope that in going along the line of seeing the ego and things as they really are, that you will then end up in a kind of nihilistic void of depression. But it's actually a step-by-step gateway to liberation. You're shedding your chains and shackles and coverings. And what's left when that's done is ultimate liberation, the taste of freedom, as it said. Vimutti Maga. On the other hand, if you don't seriously cultivate this, the habit energy of clinging will take over. And you can actually turn your cultivation into another form of clinging, where then you say, I'm going to reach this meditation state where I have, ever so happy and blissful. And that's actually a very false nirvana, and the texts warn about this. So in the early stages of cultivation, what we did, our teacher gave us a kind of practice, not even the who, or not even just reciting the name of Guanyin, but an investigation. What doesn't change? What in my experience can I observe as I'm meditating, as I'm walking, standing, sitting, is not changing? From the macro down to the micro. And what you basically do is confront the myth of permanence, the myth of a me and mind, by just looking carefully, almost clinically. What is it in my experience that doesn't change? Can I find anything? And bit by bit, you just sort of pull away one thing after another. And the heart of this was given to us in this way, but it's actually this verse that the Buddha recommended in the Vajra Sutra, and it's a famous 4-line gatha, at least in the Chinese version, and basically goes like this. All phenomena conditioned, supporting conditions, are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, like dewdrop and flash of lightning. Contemplate them thus. Another translation that someone took from the Sanskrit version of this says, a shooting star, a clouding of sight, meaning cataract, a shadow, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, and a thundercloud. This is the way one should see things as they really are. So what I'm saying, you take this verse and you use it not to so much with the hope that you're going to find something that defies this description, but in doing that, bit by bit, you will see through and let go all of these things that are really imagined. And in doing that, the mind then opens up. It doesn't collapse, and it opens up to something it couldn't have imagined while still within the paradigm paralysis of the me and mind. And it's only by pushing that boundary and border that you can actually do what's called a paradigm shift, is step outside that box. So within the box, it's always seen as me and mind, even if it's a divine heaven you're longing for. But by cultivating and getting beyond that box, it's not like there's nothing. There's just called wondrous existence. I throw it out, the texts say, I don't describe it very well, and even if someone described it very well, it wouldn't matter, because it can only be experienced. It can't really be described, and it can't be explained. It can only be known. So I want to end with that note of both a kind of a brutal honesty of looking at things as they really are, and then an unquenchable trust that if these teachings, these texts, these teachers that have gone before are right on, which in my experience they have been, then the end of this is this wondrous liberation that the passage is talking about tonight. So we'll stop there for tonight, pick up again next week, finish up this last verse. No more questions, right?
No.
Okay. Everybody's falling asleep. That's all right. We'll do the transference in English.
Yeah, okay. So tomorrow, maybe just a few announcements. Tomorrow, like always, 7:30 p.m., Reverend Heng Sure will give the lecture, continue, Avatamsaka Sutra. We are on the ground number 10, or the stage, the 10th stage of Bodhisattva. And also, you can find in our website, berkeleymonastery.org, many online practices, lectures, and so on. So if you're interested, please visit, sign up, and join us.
I hear a lot of people are coming to the morning ceremony.
Yeah, what is our record?
I'm not sure, but probably you got 50, 60 people.
50, 60 people every day, almost.
See, some of them are coming earlier than, what time do you do it here?
5.
So some people are coming earlier, but I would guess most people in their different time zone are coming to the morning recitation about midday or even in the evening or, I think I can go to morning recitation. It's like 10:30. Doesn't matter when you go. In fact, what is really interesting is that morning recitation in one place is evening recitation in another. So if you get attached to that and think it doesn't count because it's evening, it's all made from the mind. It's just recitation. And so whenever that mind stops, that's the Pure Land. Okay. We'll do the transference.
May everything be our minds as one and radiant with light. Share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bowing respect to divinity.